So here's your icebreaker question to get you started today. Have you ever had a teacher or a class that was confusing? Have you ever had a teacher or a class that was confusing? Talk about that with your group, and we'll dive into the scriptures in just a moment. So I had a little confusion going on this morning. I was getting ready to go out and mow, and there were a lot of clouds in the sky. You can see some now, but there were a lot more. They were darker, and it looked like it was about to rain. And I checked the weather apps and so forth, and looked at the radar and everything, and they were all saying it wasn't going to rain, it's not going to rain, it's not going to rain. But I look up in the sky and I'm sitting there going, it's going to rain. So I held off for a little while. I took care of getting some other things done. And then when I saw that the clouds finally broke up enough that the sun was starting to come out like it is now, I went ahead and went out and mowed the lawn. As it turns out, it never rained. The app was correct. It was accurate. Now, the reality is that weather forecasts are not 100% correct, and they're not they're not always right. But God's word is always right. It is 100% correct. And so there are times where what a different teacher says, a book that I read, even just thoughts that I have that come into my own mind contradict what the scriptures say. I start to get confused. And the same can happen for you as well. The other thing is that when we read the scriptures themselves, they can be confusing. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this section right here. As you start to dive into this part of the book of Hebrews, what you're going to find is that the term that we talked about before comes up again, and that term is the law. And the term the law gets used in such a way that it can be confusing. Because in one place, it's talking about the law as being something that was given to Moses, exists for the Israelites, and then does not go away, but it is placed on the minds and the hearts of the people in our current age, which is the age after Jesus arrived and did his part of God's plan. Yet there are other places in the same writing, the book of Hebrews, sometimes in the same passage, where it talks about the law passing away, the law being replaced. So the confusion begins. What is it talking about? Does the law pass away? Does the law not pass away? Does the law get replaced? Does the law not get replaced? Did it move from, stone tablets to our minds and hearts? And if so, why did God do that if it's just going to be replaced or passed away? What you're going to find is that there are two ways in which the term the law is used. I tried to explain it on Sunday, giving sort of two different terms so that you could separate out these two things in your mind. And I didn't come up with them. These are terms or ways that theologians and scholars have explained it over the years to try to understand the two ways in which this term is used. The one term is the term the law of Moses. And if you think of this part of the law as being like the law of the Ten Commandments and the explanation of those Ten Commandments, things that tell us what God considers to be right and wrong. The second term oftentimes gets called the Levitical law, or the law of the Levites. The Levites is the tribe of Israel that were the priests and the high priest also came from the tribe of Levi and was a direct descendant of Aaron. And what we see there are instructions to the Levites about what to do when a person sins against the law of Moses, goes against what God says is right and wrong, and the sacrifices that are supposed to take place. What we find then, if you think about the law in these two ways, is that the law of Moses does not pass away. It is the part of the law that tells us what God considers to be right and wrong. That moves from stone tablets into our minds and hearts in our current day. The other term, the Levitical law, the law that told the Levites what to do when somebody sinned and wanted to draw near to God, that part passes away and is replaced by Jesus. Read the passage that is there with this in mind, and then just discuss that a little bit. How is the law different? Which parts of the law are they talking about when they talk about the law that is placed on our minds and hearts and the law that is replaced by the new covenant? When you're ready, press play, and we'll continue with the next passage. Book of Hebrews, it to me is the segment, the passage, the group of verses that is worth memorizing the most out of this entire book. And the reason I say that is that it is a summary statement of everything that was said up to this point in time in the book of Hebrews. The problem is that most folks don't memorize this passage because, one, it's hard to remember, and two, it's because it is so packed full of information. It's thick, it is dense. It has a whole bunch of information in there that really only makes sense if you understand the first 9.5 chapters of the book of Hebrews. So, as you read this passage, think about what we've already covered over the past several weeks. Jesus is the only real and perfect and eternal sacrifice. Jesus is the great high priest in the order of Melchizedek, who enters into the most holy place and opens the way for us to enter into the most holy place. What the writer of Hebrews is telling us is that everything that's been said in the first 9.5 chapters is a lot of detail, making it perfectly clear that if we trust Jesus, we can enter into the presence of God and not be afraid, because God will be faithful to forgive us, to reconcile with us, to welcome us back home. And that's worth memorizing. Why don't you read that passage, talk about that, and talk about how you can remember it. What can help you to memorize that or to remember what it is that it is teaching? Because it's worth remembering that Jesus provides the way, and we can trust Jesus. This last section creates a lot of confusion as well, really throughout Christendom. There are teachers and theologians that will teach you completely different things about this passage. And that is because this passage is telling us something that's difficult that we don't want to hear. What it's telling us is that God provides the way for us to come home to Him through Jesus. But it's also telling us that we need to hold on to that faith and not walk away from God. Because just as God lets us come home, God will also let us leave. And that's not fun to read, and that is not truth that we like to hear. And so I want you to pull out your own Bible with your own translation and read this passage in the words that you trust, the Bible that you trust. Because what it tells us is that we should not give up meeting together with each other, and we should continue to encourage each other and spur one another on, because we need to persevere in the faith, hold on to that trust that God has welcomed us home through Jesus. We need to hold on to Christ and let Him work through us so that we no longer keep on sinning and rebelling against God. We need to do that so that we can receive the benefits and the blessings that God has for us, especially the blessing of being in the presence of God. That is what the writer of Hebrews has been talking about this whole time, how we can draw near to God and not receive the punishment that we deserve, but receive grace and mercy in our time of need. Read the passage, talk about the questions, and when you're done with that, pray for one another. And encourage each other to come back together again next week and the next week, so that we will be people who continue coming together and meeting, people who encourage one another and build each other up in the Lord, people who persevere in the faith and help others to do the same. Know that I'm praying for you as well, that God will work in you and work through you to bring others together with you and to build each other up into Christ. God bless.